Yes. You're all like, whoa. In this room, the front row was like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Yes, I have a tree on stage with me because we're going to be diving into John 15. And so we've got an illustration of the metaphor that Jesus breaks out into of a tree. So it's real. If you all in the other locations are wondering, it's real. There's real roots that are coming out of the bottom. But we're going to be looking at this passage. And before we actually dive in, I just want to set it up for us. So Jesus lived here on the earth for 33 years, and the last 3 years were his public ministry. They were those moments where he was healing and preaching and teaching, and we see these incredible recordings that he was saying, hey, come follow me, this is who I am, and people started to follow Jesus, realized that he was the Messiah, but he knew that his ultimate calling was to die on the cross for your sin and my sin, and then to be raised from the dead, to ascend into heaven with the Father, which is incredible. But in John 15, we see this moment recorded where before all of that happens, he actually gathers his disciples together, and he was preparing them because he knew that life was going to be a little bit harder for them here on earth as he ascended, and he wasn't actually there to physically take their hand. And so he was trying to prepare them, and in preparing them and preparing us, he broke out into a metaphor about a tree. He breaks out into this metaphor of how we can actually take ground in our lives and move forward. So John 15:1, Jesus speaking, and he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Verse 4, remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. He goes on and says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, though, he says, you can do nothing. Like, not you can do some things and then I do other things. No, apart from me, Jesus says, you don't have a chance here in this life. You can do nothing. Verse 6, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that's thrown away and it withers, and such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me, though, it's like, come on back, everybody. We're not all going there. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, Jesus says, that you would bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. In other words, I'm going to heaven, but you're called to bear fruit here on this earth. And when you do, when you're not cut off from me, but when you're connected to me, then you'll actually show everybody else, oh, they're following Jesus. They're the ones who are my disciples. So again, I've got this tree on stage to help us illustrate. So what does Jesus say? He said, God the Father is the gardener. Now, what role does a gardener have? Well, they have green thumbs. How many of you have a green thumb? You're like, I can do it. I can keep flowers alive, and I'm awesome at that. Raise your hand. We want to say congratulations. My hand is actually down. I kill everything that I attempt to grow. So that's okay. But God, the good news is we don't have to be the gardener. He actually gets to be the gardener. So it says that God the Father is the gardener. So what is the role of a gardener? Well, the gardener is the one who goes through the garden and actually plants the seeds. And they go through the garden, they actually water those seeds, and they walk through the garden and make sure that the trees and the flowers are actually flourishing and they're getting all of the nutrients that they need. That is the role of the gardener. And God placed us here in this earth as his seeds, as his children, so that we would live for him and so that we could actually shine the light of Jesus. But it says God is the gardener and Jesus is the vine. So God is the gardener, but Jesus is the vine. Now, what does a vine do? Well, the vine is the source and the sustenance of life that actually brings the water forward and supports the branches. And so Jesus says, I am the vine. And I just want to remind you today that Jesus is our source of life. And because we are connected to him, rivers of living water will flow. And we can live an abundant life for Jesus. That's why he says, hey, I am the vine. In other words, you aren't, but I am. But here's what our role is. We are, it says, the branches. So we are these branches. We are the branches here that are then called to actually bear fruit. Now, the leaves are our fruit today, everybody. Just go with me and just picture that there's some apples on here. I can't do everything for you. You've got to have an imagination. Okay, so we are the branches and we are called to bear fruit. So the branch is the structure that is actually strong enough to sustain the fruit. And so Jesus says, I am the vine, God is the gardener, you are the branches. And can I just tell you the awesome thing is that we are called to spread out and to actually be the love of God. We are called to bear fruit in this world. We are called to make a difference in our home, in our community, here in our church, in our workplace, in our school. This is like Southwest Florida, everybody, like just spreading out the love of God. We are the branches. And I don't know what you've come in here with today. Maybe some of you look at this and you're like, Pastor Sarah, I do not feel like I'm thriving. I actually don't feel like my life is very green right now, or I don't really feel like there's a lot of fruit on my tree. Maybe it's because you have a broken relationship, or maybe someone just said something to you this week and it's got you defeated. Maybe some of you are dealing with blended family issues and it's just so complicated. Maybe you struggle with depression or anxiety. Maybe you just have walked in today or this week and just felt hopeless. And maybe you don't even know why, but you're like, man, it just doesn't feel so green. But maybe some of you, you're like on a mountaintop and you're like, no, I actually feel like my life is bearing fruit and I do feel green. No matter where you're at, I believe Jesus wants our roots to go deeper and deeper and deeper in him so that we can be rooted to live and move forward, everyone. I believe God is calling us to take some ground